Together, Envision My Ride and the Bus Priority Study are working to help
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Monday, May 9th meeting of the Transportation and Planning Committee. We've got, once again, a full agenda, as we always seem to, even with 2 meetings a month. So I'm going to jump right in by going ahead with introductions. Let's start with our committee members who are here. I'm Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eisel and Committee Chair.
Larkin Eggleston, Committee Vice Chair.
Malcolm Brown, committee member.
Online.
Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Any other council members or committee members? Okay, let's go ahead with staff in the room. Lynn, do you want to start?
Lynn Alexander, CDOT.
Liz Babson, CDOT. Yolanda Jones, Planning.
Denata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Allison Craig, Planning.
Ed McKinney, CDOT.
John Lewis, CATS.
Jason Lawrence, CATS.
Tim Porter, Cooper Forester, Planning.
Blake Redden, Fire, Planning.
Brandon Hunter, CATS.
Kelly Geffroy, CATS.
Bruce Jones, CATS.
How about online? Or consultants, anybody?
This is Matt Prosser with Economic and Planning Systems.
Thank you. I guess that's everybody. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. We have 4 topics today. Our topics, I'm just going to go over them so everybody can kind of get a feel of what we're going to talk about today. There's Strategic Mobility Plan, Envision My Ride, the Gold Line Phase 3 Design Contract, and the Unified Development Ordinance Update. So we'll go ahead and start with the Strategic Mobility Plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Liz Babson.
Yeah, well, in the interest of time, I'll turn it over to Ed McKinney.
Okay.
And we'll just jump right in.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ed.
Great, thank you. Yeah, again, Ed McKinney with CDOT, and as you said, I know we've got a full agenda, so I'll be pretty brief. Just wanted to today give you an update on where we are with the draft plan and talk a little bit about next steps over the next couple of months. So if you go to the next slide, you've seen this before, but just as a reminder about what we're doing and how it fits into the sort of larger vision of plans and policies that have been in place. So supporting the comprehensive plan, obviously the unified development and the recently adopted policy map. We've been working sort of hand in hand and concurrent to those efforts on the strategic mobility plan. And as a reminder, there's sort of 2 big components, and I'll talk at the end about the the process for both of those in terms of review and adoption. But there's a policy piece that really starts and talks about the things that we do from a city policy standpoint and the way we will focus our particular investment in mobility. And then the streets manual, which is, as we've talked about, I think in a lot of detail recently, about the sort of policies and practice that are being put in place to help support the Unified Development Ordinance. So those are things related to our mobility goals and policy, but specifically to and relate to how we guide private development, whereas the policy piece is how we guide and direct our public investment and our public policy. If you go to the next slide, you've seen this before, but as a reminder, the point I'll make here is, again, this goal comes specifically from the comprehensive plan. It's one of the goal 5. It's one of the 10 goals of the comprehensive plan, specifically around safe and equitable mobility. Really guides the sort of transportation vision and policy we have from the comprehensive plan. There are 6 objectives, and again, these were all defined in the comprehensive plan. The point I'll make here, because I know we've shared these with you before, is what the mobility plan is doing is taking each of those objectives and sort of diving into the next level of detail. They were sort of described in the comprehensive plan, but really what we've been doing is taking them and really defining the more specific details that we would apply, particularly for the work that CDOT does, but certainly lots of coordination across other partners, both state, city, other departments, our regional partners, really getting into the more detail of how we support those objectives from our mobility, the actions and the policies we can take from the standpoint of our mobility work. If you go to the next slide, I want to go back to, because this will be an important part and sort of one of the real key strategic notions that we've done in the mobility plan that's going to guide a lot of our policies and our investment in actions. What we've done, if you go back to that safe and equitable mobility goal, we've really honed in on those 2 components and said, let's be very aspirational. On one side, safe, and we've talked about this, and certainly we've had a policy and an action plan in place now for a couple of years around Vision Zero, and that aspiration, where as a community we want to do everything we can, all the actions and policy that we take in place, and the investment to eliminate traffic deaths and serious injuries on our road. That's an aspiration, as we know. We're making sure that all the actions and investment we make is guiding to that aspiration. We've paired that with this other notion around how we move, and so we view that as an equitable aspiration around this mode shift. We've talked about this briefly before, but I want to make the point that really what we're trying to do is shift us dramatically about how we move. Today, almost 76-77% of our travel is very focused on just moving in our cars. And so what we know is we can't sustainably continue to move that way. What we're setting and putting in place this notion of a 50-50 mode share, which is essentially saying that half of our trips will be made by car, but the other half will be made by all the other modes, transit, walking, biking, and really helping us gain capacity in that system. And again, as an aspiration, we want to move in that direction. It's a pretty big aspiration, but these 2 things paired together give us the guide for everything we do. And if you go to the next slide, what that means for us is now let's focus on those modes and talk more specifically about strategy. So what the plan will then do is take each of these areas and say, what can we do to both encourage and move that mode shift, to do everything we can to make our investment and our system safe, and really hone in on the specifics of getting to that goal. So that the intent is that every decision we make, all the investment we're making needs to be calibrated to that mode shift and that safety goal. So we will expect that when we bring priorities and bring projects ahead, we're really looking and assessing the ability to move that needle on both of those aspirations. So I want to make a point there that what's really driving and what's pretty dramatically new for us is to make sure that we take those aspirations and hold ourselves accountable to the projects, the programs, and the investment that we make in each of these areas to get us there. I will emphasize one thing that sort of will be a transition to the next topic on the agenda today is thinking about transit and the bus priority, the Envision My Ride work that you're going to hear about in a moment. Going back to that aspiration of that 50-50 goal, there is no way to get there without this a real serious focus on transit. And it's not just rail, as you'll hear in a moment. One of the things we've been doing very intentionally in this process with the mobility plan is working hand in hand with CATS to talk about what the vision around this bus priority system is. And why it's important for us, as I think we all know, is that bus system works on our roads. And so really to support CATS, we want to make sure that we're doing everything in our plan, all the actions we're taking to help support the operations, the design, the function of our streets to support their vision and the long-term vision for bus priority. So again, that gives you an example of how what we want to do in this plan, what we're intending to do in this plan is to make sure that we're super focused on the actions and the investment that get us to those two aspirations. Go to the next slide, just to talk really now about next steps. So we've been working hand in hand both on this policy piece and the streets manual. At this point, just to sort of be clear, there's slightly different kind of conclusions for both of those, and I'll talk about both of them. So on the strategic mobility plan, we have a draft plan that will be publicly released next week. We'll get a copy of that to full council. We'll release that to the public, and then we'll be working through the rest of May. We've got some specific engagement events set up to kind of get sort of a conversation and input on that, all with the intent of coming back to both this committee and then full council in June for a more detailed deep dive on the details and the recommendations of the plan, a public hearing, and then ultimately a council adoption of this strategic mobility plan. On the streets manual, again, we've talked about the streets map and the comprehensive transportation review guidelines. Again, those are two things that are very specifically tied to the Unified Development Ordinance. And so as you see there, we're following the sort of schedule in that process. So we'll be updating both of those things. It'll be released at the same time that the draft UDO is released later in May. And then we'll be following after that the sort of review and adoption schedule of the Unified Development Ordinance. So I'll stop there. That's sort of a quick and fast overview of where we're going, and certainly glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McKinney. Any questions from committee members? Ms. Watlington?
Thank you. I've got a couple of quick questions. Where are we able to see directly, if you can refresh me, I know that we did a little bit of this work with the Envision My Ride, but I'd like to see a direct link to where we know people are going and from where, and how that connects directly to our priority investment strategy. Where can we see that?
That's a great question. I think I'll look to JL and John. I think you'll see some of that detail coming up in the work that they've done, and we'll be presenting in a moment around the bus priority work, which I think has a lot of technical detail to the focus. And again, what the connection for us is with that focus, there's specific projects, specific corridors. We'll be working hand in hand with CATS to collectively define the strategy for those to support the work of the bus priority system.
Sure. Councilmember Watlington, I think as we get into the bus priority study, a lot of this work was based upon an understanding of the origin and destinations of our riders and how we can better provide a higher level of reliability and efficiency through these targeted investments on specific corridors. So we will, if you like, if I can ask that we going back to your question after the bus priority presentation, I think we will have a level of information that may directly speak to your question in there.
Okay, thank you for that. And then as far as the comprehensive transportation review, thank you, Ed, for sending over the information you did. Some of the questions that are coming up as we look at UDO is a follow-up to much of the conversation that many of us have been having for a while now in regards to how we look at traffic impact studies and how we move from this piecemeal investment strategy when it comes to traffic and development to a broader strategy. Can you speak?
Ms. Watlington, can you just speak a little closer to the microphone? Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
A little bit, yeah.
I was asking for a brief I'll say comparison as far as the comprehensive transportation review currently is. Can you speak, Mr. McKinney, to what is different as it relates to how we look at traffic impact? We know we've been talking for some time about having a piecemeal approach to traffic impact studies versus a comprehensive look at how development, particularly rezonings, impact the surrounding area. Can you just very quickly highlight what is different about the approach in the comprehensive transportation review versus how we look at traffic impact studies now?
Yeah, I love the question. It's a perfect way to sort of summarize. To your point, there are some really big differences. So what I would say is the two big ones is we have taken a completely holistic view of traffic impact, and that's why the word comprehensive is in that title. So today we're very, very focused on really the traffic vehicular impacts. We do a lot of, as you know, through rezonings, we do a lot of technical analysis to understand the number of trips, where they're going, their impact on the system. We'll continue to do that, but what we've done in these new guidelines is to look holistically from both the pedestrian, multimodal standpoint. We've talked, I think, before with this group about TDM, transportation demand management kind of expectations, particularly in development that's in the more intense places in and around our transit stations. So number one difference is we've taken, in this case, a more comprehensive view of how projects impact our system. And again, it's not just about cars. The second thing that's important, and I think it maybe gets to the broader concerns, certainly the community and council has, is around what we apply, where we apply these guidelines. So today, and in practice for a number of years, we've really only been applying our traffic impact guidelines to primarily rezonings and even more specifically the conditional rezonings, where we have all the information to do that analysis. These new guidelines are going to apply, in connecting it to the UDO, they're going to apply to all development, not just rezonings, but all by right development. So if you, no matter whether you went through a rezoning or not, if you're triggering these guidelines through the basic by right land development process, you will be doing the analysis, you'll be assessing your impact. So two big differences, now a multimodal approach and a full kind of comprehensive approach to the amount of development and the nature and scale of development that we'll be applying these guidelines to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watlington. Mr. Winston has joined us and has a question.
Thank you very much. And I have a question about the priority investment strategy. This is actually timely because it actually relates to a question, an item on our agenda tonight, which I'm considering voting against. And it relates to Vision Zero spending on a traffic median on South Boulevard. I'm familiar with it because I used to live over there for about a year and a half. And I'm familiar about how difficult that intersection can be. However, my concern is that with this spend, we will deal with part of a problem, a very small part of a much more complicated intersection. And my fear is that once we move this dirt and we make this change, that it will kind of, that intersection will get forgotten about because this money is going to be spent from the state. But I also know that traffic improvements are usually iterative. So I guess this question relates to the priority investment strategy. How can or will we be able to use this as a tool to kind of get the bigger picture of what is going to happen in certain situations? Because again, this particular item tonight will deal with left turns coming out of one business, but it doesn't deal with the grade difference, the railroad crossing. It doesn't make, I think this might even make pedestrian crossing less safe and more dangerous. So how do will we be able to utilize this to kind of have an idea of what the long play is, or will this just be like a budget year to budget year tool?
No, another great question, because it does drive, that question really is at the core of what we're trying to do differently in this plan than maybe in the past, which is exactly what you're saying, is we are identifying the bigger vision. There's certain corridors that we know the challenge isn't at one location. It's really a holistic set of solutions to a corridor, both from a safety standpoint, from making sure that we've got a multimodal vision for bike and pedestrian, in many cases, appropriately managing for the traffic impacts. And so the strategies that we're putting in place really are trying to identify the combined holistic vision in some corridors. In the case of our bike strategies, we've kind of mapped out what we think that core network is. But then to your point, with that kind of more holistic vision, we've also making sure that the strategies are sort of incremental, that you can, essentially it's a scalable plan so that we can ensure that we can do things quickly. I mean, the example you're bringing up is accurate, that we need to, in some cases, do some quick fixes, but we also, this plan will make sure that we don't lose sight of the bigger vision. So we want to do, it's really a balance of doing both things. We need to set the larger vision, but do it in a scalable way so that we can actually incrementally make the investments we need to make to get us to where we're trying to go. That's the intent. You'll hopefully see that in the strategies and the recommendations that we'll be making in the draft plan.
Thanks a lot. I would love to touch base offline about that item before tonight's meeting as well.
Thank you. If we don't have any other questions on the strategic mobility plan, I'm going to save my questions because I think they do overlap with Envision My Ride. So I'll save mine. I'll welcome our council colleague, Mr. Driggs, who joined us as well online. And we will go ahead and move to Envision My Ride. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In consideration of time and the full agenda, I'm just going to introduce CAT staff. Jason Lawrence, to my left, is our Director of Service Planning and has been working with Bruce Jones in leading the entire Envision My Ride effort, looking at building a better bus system. This is the third plank of that three-fold plan that was rolled out in 2018. But the bus priority study is about gaining more reliability in our system through very targeted investments. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jason and Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And as John just mentioned, this effort really truly is the culmination of the Envision My Ride study that's been ongoing for 4 years now. And the bus priority study really is the capstone for the entire effort and really kind of lays out the strategies to improve time, access, and experience for all of our passengers. And on the next slide, you can see how all these things are interconnected. Just like we can't totally improve the customer experience just by putting frequency out there, by improving access, but we got to improve the bus stop and the capital throughout our system. So all those things are connected to really improve the entire bus system from the ground up. And just like Ed was talking about improving mode split across our city and the county, we need to do the strategic mobility plan and integrate completely within that effort to achieve 10-minute neighborhoods, a goal out of the Charlotte 2040 comp plan. That's going to be really hard and difficult unless we introduce new types of transit services like microtransit and on-demand services and high-frequency services throughout our community. And thinking globally, thinking about the Connect Beyond effort and the recommendations coming out of that study, a strong, frequent, and reliable bus system inside of Mecklenburg County will certainly help us achieve that broader regional goal. And for the 2030 Transit System Plan, it's great to have high-frequency rail corridors, but you need a strong, frequent bus network that connects the rest of the community all together in a single system. So we really feel that this Envision My Ride bus priority study that is bringing together everything that we've done over the past 4 years for bus planning really helps us achieve all the goals that you see there and help kind of as the connecting tissue between each of the studies we see there today. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Bruce to go over the recommendations coming out of this effort, and I believe we're going straight to a quick 2-minute video before we go into that.
Yes, thank you, Jason. So this video just provides a brief overview summary of the study itself. But more importantly, it also contains a few, interviews with a few of our passengers who rely on our services. And so we thought that it was important to speak to the individuals and go through the recommendations to understand what impact this would have on their daily lives from a commuting standpoint. So if you would play that video. Together, Envision My Ride and the Bus Priority Study are working to help CATS build a better bus network. Envision My Ride developed a plan which includes more frequent service, better crosstown connections, and more direct service to connect you to the places you need to go. The Bus Priority Study continues to work by recommending ways in which CATS can make bus service more reliable, quicker, and convenient for riders.
I use public transportation to go to school, go shopping, go to work, see friends.
Mostly from home, Beatty'sford Road, to downtown, to the doctor, and to do my shopping.
Maybe this job right here, I need to be able to get here. And CATS gets me from point A to point B.
The bus is my only means of transportation getting around.
The Bus Priority Study is also recommending new priority bus treatments to help make sure buses come on time. These treatments include transit signal priority, which allows buses to communicate with traffic signals to get a green light, and queue jumps, which provide buses with a dedicated space at the intersection and helps to allow them to jump ahead of stalled traffic.
If the buses were more reliable, it would be a better way of quality of life and independence for us.
I will have a little more time to come and drink me some coffee, eat some breakfast, and be ready to go to work.
We can get there on time. It improve a whole lot. People get to work on time and get where they need to be.
Hey, so you can go to the next slide. The next one. Thanks. And so just to
I
take
think
it
we
back.
lost audio in the room.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. So just to take it back and give you an overview of the two initiatives. So Envision My Ride, as we mentioned, started back in 2016, where we developed the initial plan for the future network. And so through extensive outreach with the public, we developed the initial recommendations, which included more frequent service, so increasing the number of routes that operate every 15 minutes or better, creating more direct service that sticks to primary corridors where possible, and then also, where possible, shifting away from that hub and spoke model that forced a lot of individuals to travel to uptown to make their connection and then travel back out. So where possible, creating more crosstown connections with hub-to-hub connectivity outside of uptown. In addition to that, looking at how we can greater connect to different modes, so between the Lynx Blue Line and different bus routes as well. So the Bus Priority Study is continuing the work that we did with Envision My Ride, now recommending capital improvements for how we can continue to improve service. So looking at it from a speed and reliability standpoint, so implementing those priority treatment recommendations that you saw in the video, from queue jump locations to signal priority. And then in addition to that, looking at how we can improve connections not only between transit, but other forms of mobility as well through a new concept that we're rolling out known as the Mobility Hub. And I'll go through some examples of what that looks like in a few slides as well. And then last but certainly not least, looking at how we can make improvements to the overall bus stop to help improve the passenger experience as well. We can go to the next one. And so we framed the overall improvements for Envision My Ride and the Bus Priority Study into three different categories. So looking to improve overall travel time for individuals, looking to enhance experience, and looking to increase access. And so with those three different buckets, I'll go through them here in the next couple of slides, but with improving time, we're looking to roll out those frequency improvements. So building out that high-frequency network of service that comes every 15 minutes or better for core routes. The routes that you see here on red give you the indication of the routes that will have future all-day high-frequency service. And then the routes that you see in the gold are the peak hour express services that will have future high-frequency service. In addition to that, as I mentioned, rolling out those priority bus treatments. So we have partnered with CDOT to roll out signal priority to all corridors that they maintain within the city of Charlotte. So whenever we're facing delay, if we're behind schedule, we'll be able to communicate with the traffic signals to advance or extend that green light so that we can catch back up to the schedule. In addition to that, enhancing experience, the bus stop improvements and mobility hubs that I mentioned. And then last but certainly not least, looking at how we can continue to increase access through the new crosstown improvements and a new concept known as microtransit with the first last mile piece to make those convenient, flexible connections to frequent transit routes. And so if we start with improving time, and so if you go to the next one, this slide shows you the future high-frequency network. So the routes that you see here in red are the future corridors that we've identified for future service of 15 minutes or better. And so those include multiple corridors of opportunity that the city has been working through. So that includes Beatties Ford Road, Central Avenue, Freedom, Wilkinson Boulevard, Graham Street, Sugar Creek, and West Boulevard. In addition to that, we'll be implementing 15-minute or better service on corridors such as South Tryon, Providence Road, and then also Tyvola. The goal for Envision My Ride is to have no route that has a frequency of more than 30 minutes. So the vision is to have all bus service come at 30 minutes or less, whether it's through the traditional fixed route service or the on-demand microtransit service that I'll get to in a few slides. And then in addition to that, looking to roll out a consistent schedule throughout the day. So similar to what we just recently implemented with the Lynx Blue Line, where we have consistent 15-minute service 7 days a week. Looking to roll out something similar on our bus network so that we can shift away from having a weekday schedule, a Saturday schedule, and a Sunday schedule, and instead move to a consistent schedule so individuals will know that their bus is coming every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, every 20 minutes, and so on. In addition to that, we also looked at focus corridors for where we can implement additional priority treatments. And so through the study, just because of the scope limitations, we only identified 6 high priority corridors to begin with. And so the goal of this is to eventually develop a capital program that we can begin to roll out on additional corridors as the need arises. But what we looked at is we evaluated the future high frequency network, so the routes that I walked you through before, to identify 6 focus corridors where we have the greatest level of need in terms of making those priority investments. And so with that, we looked at metrics such as where we were facing bus delay, on-time performance issues, and then also looking at additional metrics, including population and employment density, both existing and projected as well. And then looking at equity goals, so specifically looking at locations where we have a greater concentration of individuals that rely on CATS to access their destinations. And then in addition to that, looking at how we can meet the future Charlotte 2040 comp plan goals as well. And so based on all of those metrics, we identified 6 focus corridors of high need based on those criteria that I walked you through. And so that includes Route 9 Central Avenue, 7 Beatties Ford, 16 South Tryon, 27 Monroe Road, 34 Freedom Drive, and then Route 2 Ashley Scaly Bark, which provides that connection between Freedom Drive and the Scaly Bark station. And so with these focus corridors, we've developed recommendations in the world of signal priority adjustments, and then also looking at where we can roll out queue jumps, as mentioned in the video, which essentially builds upon signal priority, but allows us to take advantage of a specialized signal that will allow us to jump ahead of stalled traffic, if you will. In addition to that, we also looked at making bus stop improvements on those corridors as well. And then we can go to the next slide. So shifting to enhancing experience. So one of the main things that we wanted to do is look at how can we improve the bus stop system-wide. And so one of the main things that we're looking at is moving away from our current policy that primarily uses ridership to roll out amenities, and instead developing a new scoring process that looks at it more holistically. So instead of just looking at whether you have 25 or more boardings, taking that into consideration still, but then looking at other factors as well. So looking at wait time, if it's a high transfer activity center, if we have maybe a major activity generator, if it's a major employer, if it's a park, a library, hospital, medical facilities, and so on. And so the goal of this is to develop that scoring approach that will allow us to roll out amenities at a greater scale. So say maybe you don't have the ridership currently, but maybe there's other factors that we consider based on this scoring criteria that can help us justify rolling out additional amenities to improve the passenger experience at the bus stop level. And then I should say too that this will set us up so that we can begin to roll out some of those near-term bus stop improvements beginning as early as next fiscal year with this process. You can go to the next one. And so this chart just shows you the different tiers of amenities based on the different levels of bus stops that we've identified. So we have the standard stop, which includes all of our stops in our system. At minimum, we want to have an accessible boarding area for individuals to access our services. So building upon the City of Charlotte's ADA transition plan, we've made some adjustments to our standard details so that we can revise and meet some accessibility guidelines that are in place. So we want to make sure that at minimum, we do have accessible boarding areas at our stops. And then with the standard stop, it builds depending on the level of activity at that stop. So we go from type A to type B where you add a bench, and then type C will add a shelter. In addition to that, I mentioned the mobility hubs. And so what you see here on the chart on the right-hand side, those 3 different tiers are the mobility hubs that we'll be rolling out. And so at minimum, all mobility hubs will have enhanced shelters, but then they have additional amenities to help facilitate that transfer experience, not only between different bus routes and rail, but then also other forms of mobility as well. So having places where we have bicycle storage, scooter storage, places like wayfinding signage, additional amenities including off-board fare payment, and so on. And if you go to the next slide. And so I mentioned that the mobility hubs are designed to help improve connectivity and access to transit and other modes. So not only just looking at how we can make those bus-to-bus connections, but looking at how we can connect to rideshare programs, Lyft and Uber, bicycle programs, and then also more importantly, that first last mile piece known as microtransit. So we have 3 different hub types, and this map here actually shows level 2 and 3. We didn't map level 1 just because that can be placed at intermediate points throughout the network. And so just for the visual purposes or spatial purposes, we only mapped level 2 and 3. But the locations that you see here with those white diamonds are the locations that we've identified for those mobility hubs. If you go to the next slide. So starting with the first mobility hub, so this is designed to be an intermediate stop that can be placed throughout the route on the network at major activity centers, major transfer destinations, and so on. And so I mentioned that the amenities that feature at this mobility hub include enhanced shelters, but then also additional things such as bike storage programs or storage facilities rather, then also wayfinding information and then real-time information as well. Go to the next one. And then level 2 builds upon level 1. The main difference is this is set up to be an on-street transfer experience for individuals. So whenever we have 2 intersecting bus routes, we would implement mobility plazas. And so that's essentially 4 enhanced stops at the corner of the intersection that will provide an opportunity for individuals to easily transfer between different routes. So the key with this mobility plaza is that we are recommending far side stop locations. Essentially what that means is it's placed after the intersection, and the reason being is because we want to be able to take advantage of that signal priority. So whenever we're able to advance or extend that green light, we want to make sure that we can clear the intersection and then safely pick up and drop off passengers. With that, we do want to make sure that we implement enhanced crossing experiences for individuals that need to access the stops and other safety improvements as well. Go to the next one. And so the last tier is the mobility center, which is a level 3. And so this is designed more so as a mini transit center. And so you can think of this as some of our smaller community transit centers like Rosa Parks, Eastland, and then also some of our park and ride locations, and then light rail facilities as well. And so the main difference with this is intended to be an end-of-the-line location where we have need for operator layovers, so we'll have dedicated bays and space and resources for our operators as well. But then also potential storage spaces for when we make those rideshare connections, for park and ride connections, and then also the microtransit piece as well. So we want to make sure that we have dedicated space at the mobility center so that we can help facilitate, and more importantly, that first last mile connectivity between frequent transit routes and the key destinations that individuals need to access. You can go to the next one. And so last but not least, looking at how we can increase access. And so this is rolling out those crosstown and future connection improvements that I mentioned. And so through Envision My Ride, we've identified several key routes and new connections, including a connection between North Lake Mall and J.W. Clay via Harris. And then also looking at how we can provide all-day service on Albemarle Road, Sugar Creek Road between Derrida Community and the Sugar Creek Station. Looking at how we can make a connection between Waverly and Valentine. And then also Links Sharon Road West Station between Valentine, taking advantage of those new 485 toll lanes. And then also, last but not least, looking at the future connection between the River District via West Boulevard. And so with this, I also mentioned that we are looking at enhancing the network through on-demand and microtransit zones. And you go to the next one. And so microtransit essentially works as on-demand transit solutions using a smaller vehicle where individuals in an ideal situation will be able to request a ride within our CATS app or something similar. And they'll be able to be picked up within a specific zone or boundary and then dropped off at a destination within that zone or at one of those key mobility hubs to connect to transit options. Go to the next one. And so we have different use cases where microtransit can be successful. So it can be a new service or a neighborhood circulation service. So particularly in areas where we don't have good street connections to the main corridor, looking at how we can still provide that transit connection to connect individuals to those mobility hubs and frequent transit routes. It can be a first last mile connection, so where we have end of the line service in areas where traditional fixed route service may not be as productive, but there's still a need for us to provide those important connections. And then also looking at how we can replace or supplement some of our fixed route services, particularly in areas where fixed route traditionally isn't as successful from a performance standpoint, or as flexible, I should say. Looking at additional solutions for how we can replace that with a microtransit or first last mile component. Go to the next one. And so with this, we identified several zones and boundaries based on a number of metrics, but the main thing that we wanted to look at is where do we currently have a high need for transit, but a low potential for fixed route. And I say that based on employment density, population density, land use, and other metrics as well. And so we use that to develop initial zones and boundaries for where microtransit can be successful and how it can connect to the future network and priority corridors. You can go to the next one. And so with that, we've identified initial zones for microtransit. And so that includes the Still Creek area, the Ballantyne area. So the areas that you see here in the red or light pink, those are the zones that we've identified for the first last mile component or microtransit piece. So it includes Mint Hill, Matthews, and Northern Towns, and then also the West Boulevard area around Wilkinson, Freedom Drive, and Remount. And so there's an opportunity for us to identify additional zones and a strategy for this so that we can continue to provide those first last mile connections, specifically to Links Blue Line and other future rapid lines as well. We have initially identified 3 zones as high need candidates. That includes the West Boulevard area that I mentioned between Freedom Drive, Wilkinson, and Remount. And then also the UNCC area, and then Matthews Mint Hill. And so I say that we are still in the process, so we did the initial work to identify these zones. The next steps will be to identify an operational strategy for how we can provide service. So whether that's taking it on in-house or contracting out with a third party, looking at the cost or the pro benefits for that solution. And you can go to the next one. And so I wanted to touch back on the public and stakeholder outreach. You can go to the next slide. So we began our initial outreach last summer where we conducted an initial survey. So we continued that throughout this past March and April. And so throughout the entire period, we engaged over 5,500 individuals. And so with that, the initial outreach was to identify the frames, goals, and objectives for the study overall. And so we used that information to then develop the initial recommendations for priority treatments and then the microtransit zones as well. And then based on that initial outreach, we developed the final recommendations that you see before you today. You can go to the next one. And so you heard in the video the rider stories. So we wanted to really hone in on what would this mean from a commuter standpoint, specifically for individuals that rely on CATS to get to their destinations. We heard key things like individuals rely on CATS every day to access their destinations. And if buses were on time, that'll help them connect to their destinations on time. You heard from the gentleman in the middle that he'll be able to enjoy a cup of coffee before he clocks in for work. So little things that we may take for granted. This really makes a difference in the lives of individuals, specifically for individuals that rely on CATS to get to and from where they need to connect to. You can go to the next one. And so just to frame up the recommendations, based on the public outreach and engagement period, we had several key themes that arose from that, including fare collection slows down the boarding process. So as a result, we developed several recommendations for how we address that. So with the fare collection, we have the off-board fare collection options, specifically at those level 3 mobility hubs. And then also looking at how we can make mobile payments and other payment solutions as convenient as possible. We heard that buses are often delayed at the intersection, so that's where those priority treatments come into play, with signal priority, queue jumps, and then also dedicated bus lanes. Continue to explore the feasibility and possibility for that. We often heard that bus stops are uncomfortable and feel unsafe for passengers. So looking at how we can roll out those mobility hub and overall bus stop improvements throughout the network from an accessibility standpoint, looking at where we can roll out lighting and take advantage of new technologies as well. And then often individuals felt that their bus is often delayed or they need to wait a long time. So we have, of course, real-time information recommendations, including the wayfinding signage at our bus stops and mobility hubs, but then also the enhancements through our mobile app as well. And then last, of course, certainly not least, my bus stop is often too far or not walkable. So we heard that from a number of individuals as to why they don't currently use CATS, or for individuals that do currently use it, we often found that there was a gap to get them to their destination because the fixed route didn't reach it. And so looking at that, we're now developing, as I mentioned, those micro-transit zones to provide that first last mile connection for individuals. You can go to the next one. And so just to sum up the recommendations overall, so we are working to get the overall bus network map adopted. And so what this will help us do is set us up for how we implement it moving forward. So that'll help us identify funding sources. It'll help us also identify a strategy for how we begin to roll out the improvements over the next few years. In addition to that, looking at how we can roll out those improvements on those 6 focus corridors that I mentioned, with the long-term vision or goal of building that capital program that we could begin to roll out on additional corridors as the need arises. Looking at how we can adopt that bus stop improvement plan, mainly looking at how we can make all of our stops accessible and rolling out those improvements, and then also rolling out the mobility hub improvements as well. And then looking at how we can continue to roll out microtransit. So we have the initial zones identified. I mentioned the next steps would be to develop an operational strategy on how we provide service, what type of service would work best in those areas, and so on. And then also, as I mentioned too, just to touch back on the capital program. So using that to develop the recommendations for how we continue to roll out those improvements on additional corridors moving forward. And then also using that to explore different funding sources and streams, specifically federal funding that'll help us identify corridors for corridor-based BRT or bus rapid transit solutions, or other enhancements as well. You can go to the next one. And so this slide just sums it up with the connectivity. So think of it all as a connected network that not only works to support CATS goals, but the overall vision of Charlotte with the Charlotte 2040 plan and then also the SMP. So we'll provide frequent transit along main corridors that work to connect to those key mobility hubs. And at the mobility hubs, you'll have those important connections for pedestrians, bike connections, scooter connections, and then also dedicated space for those first last mile solutions to help improve connectivity, and then also options for commuters for the driving and rideshare programs. So they'll have dedicated space and infrastructure in place so they can connect to CATS and then access their key destinations. And so with that, that closes that out. So I'll open it up to questions that you all may have.
Thank you very much. There was a lot of really rich information. Appreciate it. Appreciate the work. Our first question is from Mr. Eggleston.
Thank you. I've got a couple. I'll go with the simple ones first. on page 11, is it pronounced semi-seat or semi-seat? Is that just the little kind of two small seats that come off of the pole?
Yes.
I mean, and I don't need an exact number if you don't have it, but do you have a ballpark idea of what one of those costs us?
Not off the top of my head, we can get that for you.
Okay. My guess would be it's not a lot, and I think that we should, we talked about aspirational goals earlier. To me, every bus stop should have that, because it can't be a significant investment in the big scheme of things. And I think every bus stop that has anyone getting on or off at it, and potentially waiting for a bus, should have one of those, particularly if we're talking about one that's on one of these 30-minute routes where someone could theoretically be standing there waiting for 29 minutes. You know, I know if I've been on my feet all day, and I'm not even that old yet, my legs and my back hurt, and I want to sit down. And as many elderly folks as we have that use public transportation, I can't imagine someone having to stand there for 29 minutes or, you know, sit in a muddy area next to a bus stop or whatever the case might be. So I'd like to see us set that as a goal, and again, we could prioritize the rollout of that based on the routes and how long someone might be waiting at one of those stops. But so I'd be interested to know what the cost on that is, so that we could figure out from a budgetary standpoint how difficult it would be. Did you say on the Reliant populations, are we factoring in rider age in Reliant populations?
Yeah, so senior facilities, elderly population, it'll be transit reliant population, low-income population, all of those metrics combined with that.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to make sure that if we've got that data, that we're factoring in the age of our riders on the amenity rollout. Because again, I think for ones where we know we have a higher senior ridership, that should be a priority. The consistent schedules for weekdays and weekends, did you say that the goal would be to have that on every single route in the system? I certainly appreciate the need for the consistency. I do, though, wonder, particularly on some of the routes that bring people into our high concentrations of jobs, I wonder how big the disparity is between a Monday through Friday ridership and a Saturday, Sunday ridership. Because while it's an admirable goal, I think we can, if we're looking at an 80% drop-off on a corridor that brings someone into Uptown or brings someone into South End from Friday to Saturday, I think it's, when everything's a zero-sum game with the investments we're making on transit, I think that might be a bad trade-off. There might be a better way to spend those dollars than having, 15-minute frequencies on a route that doesn't have many people riding it on the weekends, because it mostly takes people to and from work. So while I appreciate that as a goal, I hope that we don't prioritize that over other things I think should be more important, because in some cases I think that the differing schedule for weekdays and weekends makes sense. And my last one that's maybe a little bit more involved, I'm sure we've all seen the article, I believe it was WFAE did, and they used the Pineville-Matthews route as a example, though I think it's probably not the only one that would qualify as a route that had really low ridership, and seemingly, unlike some of our Uptown routes who have not seen the ridership they normally would for the last 2 years because of COVID and lower worker populations in Uptown, this one doesn't seem like it would be as affected. To me, and you use the word routes that are less successful, and then you corrected yourself, but I actually think you're right the first time. I think we do have routes that are less successful from the metric of ridership, and I wonder what thought we're giving to, and I don't mean to pick on that one, but that's one they had some specifics around in that article. I wonder about a Pineville-Matthews route, if that's one that could be better served on that with the micro-transit options you discussed, because the cost per rider to operate a full-size bus really doesn't seem to make sense. Or if I'm off base on why that route makes more sense than I think it does, then I'm happy to be corrected too. But are we looking at the microtransit as options for replacing routes like that we are spending so much per ride?
Yeah, Councilmember, you're exactly on point with that. I think as the study illuminated, there's certain corridors in certain areas where if ridership is the only measure, we're falling below expectations. A 40-foot transit bus cannot be the only solution for mobility in every neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that those communities, those neighborhoods don't need mobility options. We just have to find a better tool for that. Now, there are different means of providing that. The first and last mile connections to high capacity transit, like the Blue Line and the Gold Line, is very different than the community circulators where the origin and destinations are within particular neighborhoods. A senior center providing on-demand service to the grocery store doesn't necessitate a fixed route service, but is certainly a mobility need for that individual. And that's one that could be better handled through an on-demand mobility on-demand option rather than our normal fixed route. And so that's an important part of what this study is illuminating. As was mentioned earlier, we're looking at the operational models for it. Should it be CATS operated or should it be contracted out? And that'll be the next phase of this study.
Thank you, and I agree. I'm certainly not looking to take away transportation options from people who live along these or work along these lower ridership corridors. In fact, I think in a situation like this where some of these buses might see, a number of riders that you could count on one hand at certain times of day, we can provide better service for those 4 or 5 or 6 riders by giving them closer to door-to-door service with microtransit than we're providing them with this route, and we could probably do it at a lower cost.
The challenge that we have with that, and we have to identify, is microtransit works within defined zones, we'll call it. We are not Uber and we are not Lyft. We can't take you from one end of the county to the other and expect to have any level of efficiency in that. And so while this moves the ball significantly in terms of effectiveness from a mobility option, we still have to have that ability through connecting them to our high-capacity transit corridors to give cross-region, cross-county types of trips that individuals may still need.
Yeah, and I won't belabor the point. I think we can talk about it more offline, but just looking at that one route in particular on this map, it looks like there's a lot of opportunities to get folks to some of our all-day high-frequency bus networks and things like that. So, again, we can dig into that more offline, but I just hope that we are not married to routes that we have some statistics to demonstrate might not be the best use of our funds.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winston and then Mr. Graham.
Thank you very much. So yeah, this presentation was exciting, especially for me, the microtransit piece, as it relates to first and last mile. And so, but I do think that there is something missing around low-hanging fruit, but perhaps this is not necessarily a CATS issue, but more of a CDOT issue. I currently live on one of those high-frequency routes around the Steel Creek area, around Arrowwood, between Arrowwood, South Tryon, and Beam Road. And right now, if during peak hours, it's not necessarily a far distance to the bus stop, but to get out of the neighborhood and get across South Tryon is quite impossible, almost in a vehicle. I couldn't imagine if I had to get to the bus stop that was across the street. You would have to walk 20 to 30 minutes out of the way to get to what should be a 5 to 10 minute walk. So and this is an area where there are a bunch of working class people, a lot of young people, multiple families in one single family homes, immigrant populations. So if we can spend, I'm sure these micro transit hubs are going to be significant investments, which is great, which we need. But how are we going to solve especially on these high frequency routes, from literally just getting people from their neighborhood, from their doorstep to the bus stop in places where it's not necessarily the proximity of the bus stop or the need for microtransit. Is CDOT working on that type of a mobility solution for this, along with this Envision My Ride?
Welcome to Still Creek, Mr. Winston. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Councilmember Winston. I'll start this, but I'll also, if Ed or Liz want to join in on the CDOT conversation, I think what you've really identified is one of kind of the key parts of all the different planning that's been underway for the past couple of years now. We are not an island to ourselves on any of these services or our plans and programs. They all have to work together comprehensively. No one solution is going to solve every neighborhood's problem. And you've identified, one of our corridors that was one of the 6 priority corridors that Bruce laid out was Route 16 South Tryon. And certainly our neighborhoods off of that, and you have a state roadway that sometimes may be difficult to cross due to medians or great distances.
Not sometimes,
right.
All the time.
Certainly great distance between, a signalized crossing. So I think what our approach will be to take those priority corridors and just, look at every stop, look at where we can see improvements, coordinate where there's opportunities to invest in and identify issues on the sidewalk program, to coordinate with bus stop improvements. But I think that is, certainly an issue that will require a collaborative effort to solve, not just necessarily on transit. So I do think that's where the intersection of the strategic mobility plan and the Envision My Ride really come together, is in that issue you just identified.
Well, I think it needs to come together sooner than later, as we start to move forward on this. Because again, if we're making millions of dollars of investment, but if we're not actually getting to the low-hanging fruit solutions, then it's a kind of a fair win, And I don't think we want to do that.
Councilmember Winston, this is Liz with CDOT. That's a great point, and while you just heard 2 presentations that are really starting to move the needle in a much bigger way in trying to create those safe and equitable and connected modes for all of our residents to travel throughout the city, it is certainly not lost on us, and we're not waiting for these plans to get through the process before we go about doing that work. I'll give you a couple of examples. Probably 75% of the new pedestrian crossings that we've been installing throughout the city over the last several years directly align with CATS and the new routes that they've put in place throughout the city. So we are absolutely already working together and looking for those opportunities to really tackle the highest and best and most critical needs that exist out there. But what you're hearing our folks talk about today is really continuing to just do a much more comprehensive, system-wide approach. We're doing it as fast as we can incrementally. And then I'll also point out to you as well, in the manager's recommended budget, he has recommended a pretty sizable increase for the Vision Zero initiative, and that is the kind of work that we do with those funds.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Winston. We have Mr. Graham and Ms. Watlington, myself, and if we can get to it, Mr. Driggs, who's attending as a guest. I'd like to ask everybody if we can try to keep them. Anything you can have, conversation you can have offline would be great, just because we've got a lot more content here. So go ahead, Mr. Graham.
Great presentation, and I received the information, but most of it to me seemed like a lot of blocking and tackling, things that we should be doing, that we should be aspiring to do. So hypothetically, what would it take for us to be world-class, right, based on where the council has in many forms said we wanted to go in terms of the bus system? And then secondly, and you probably can't answer this question either, how do we combat the perception, right? And that generally leads to people reality in terms of the deficiencies that the bus system has, right? So how do we kind of, notwithstanding what we just saw here today, the presentation, the work that I know you guys are trying to get to, so how how do you do that so that we can build public confidence in the system?
Right. Councilman, that's a great question, and I think what we've all aspired to is to create and become a world-class city that has world-class mobility options, whether that's for pedestrians, transit users, or people who are driving in their vehicles throughout. What we believe, I believe, that the Envision My Ride program helps us get there. Now, when you look around the world and try and point out those world-class systems, you have to, what drives that determination sometimes are external factors that are outside of our control. If you are in New York City or Chicago or LA, where traffic is so bad that you have no other option but to use transit, and those legacy systems have built up very robust systems. You may think that is the definition of world-class, but driven by an external factor. I don't think we want to get in. What we're trying to do is build a system that doesn't force you into limited other options, but because of the effectiveness of the system, it is your choice. The one thing I will say that drives our ridership on rail is the reliability of the service. When you're operating in a rail corridor without traffic, without other external impediments, your trip today is the same amount of time as it was a year ago, as it will be 10 years from now. We're trying to move that level of reliability into our bus system through these capital investments in queue jumps and signal priority and bus-only lanes, et cetera. I think this program gets us there. Now, there's always the question of what this will cost in order to do that, and we will continue to work through that.
Well, thank you for the response, and my concerns are similar to Councilmember Winston and Wallington in terms of first mile, last mile. It's just getting there, right? And even for someone like me who thought about it, to take transit to go to a game, and I said, no, I can't get there, so I took my car, and Mr. Winston, I went in a parking space when I got there, right? So it goes to the conversation we've been having among a lot of transportation-related questions that we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Watlington.
Thank you, ma'am. In the spirit of being quick. Anyway, first of all, I just want to say I'm happy that it seems that we've got a consistent chorus amongst council. I know that for many of us, we see the opportunity here. We want to know, how do we actually get it to materialize, right? And so I just, for the record, want to come alongside some of what my colleagues have said and lift up again Still Creek, and how do we really create a viable public transit system there that people can utilize, not only for the folks in Still Creek, but also our commuters coming from across the border, because we know that especially during peak hours, that is a huge contributor to our volume on our roads. Also, I will say as well, when we talk about the budget, we're in the budget season right now. We are considering what we need to have in place for people to get behind this transformational mobility network. What is it going to take? What is the ask today or within the next couple of weeks that we can really take a look at what's in our budget and what will help us get to some of this low-hanging fruit or low capital items? Because to some of my earlier colleagues' point, these certainly seem aspirational. We know these are needs, and some of them are not very expensive at all. So what can we do right now to build confidence in the future of the system, and so that people can begin to understand and see how an investment in a larger capacity will actually deliver better transformational, a better transit network?
Thank you, Councilmember Watlington. I think that is a great question. I think what we've attempted to do is lay out the strategic plan for moving the system forward. I think sort of short-term, immediate, or low-hanging fruit that has been used, I think that is going to require some more collaborative conversations with council in terms of targeted priorities. I would not say there is a magic bullet or a quick answer to any of that, and it depends on area. So the solution or the challenge in Steel Creek is very different than that in University City. So I think that's going to require some collaborative discussions from a CAT standpoint with council members to determine what are the varied needs and what are the opportunities, both short and long term, to address those.
Okay, to the extent that we can get that completed ahead of the budget, that I think should be the goal at this point. We don't want to miss another opportunity to do this. You guys have done great work to lay the groundwork. Now it's time to get it done. So whatever that looks like over the coming weeks, coming months, as we get this budget finalized, let's not lose this opportunity, at least to have an understanding of the order of magnitude that we would need to set aside for some of these improvements. The other question I have is in regards to average ride time. Do we have any understanding of what the actual reduction would be on particular routes once these things are implemented, specifically the increased frequency? We talked about the frequency, but I want to understand what is that worth to a rider in terms of their overall transit time.
Yeah, so we, did an analysis on Central Avenue with the traffic analysis through Visum to look at what impact would the priority recommendations have on overall travel time. And we saw that we were saving 5% per trip, which is a pretty good travel time savings for that corridor specifically. So there are benefits with that. And when you look at that from a holistic standpoint, so if you're able to get to your destination, let's say 5 minutes earlier, as you saw with that video, that means that that individual may be able to get a cup of coffee before he goes to work, or other things that he may be able to do before he signs on. So we did see some promises with the Visum analysis, and so we'll continue to evaluate that as additional priority treatments are implemented. But just to answer your question, we did see some promising results with that.
So as I think about the other things that make taking transit less attractive, I know that for myself, part of the reason why I only ride when I have to is because there's an exorbitant amount of wait time. I don't know whether it's because people are having to take their break or just because we're waiting on the next line, but I think there's probably another hot Pareto item there, and it leads me to my next question in terms of have we talked about what this means in terms of resources and what we need to put behind drivers, improving driver safety, improving wages so that we can make sure we have drivers for these increased routes? Have we talked about security and what enhanced security looks like so people feel safer on these routes? Have we talked about maintenance and cleaning and upkeep of the buses themselves? Because I'll tell you, that's another thing that's markedly different between the rail line and the buses, is getting on the bus and looking around, you see that there feels like there's another level of maintenance and operating investment. So have we considered what it's going to take, not just for the capital investment, but for also the operating expenses that'll be increased?
Thank you, Councilmember Watlington. Again, great question. I think going back to the manager's proposed submitted budget, there's a significant focus and investment in the human capital. CATS as an enterprise fund has always followed the guidelines of the other general fund departments. And I think the additional focus financially in terms of wages increases for our operating employees, and that would also trickle down and impact our third-party provider, our bus provider, RATP Dev. I think that will make a big difference from a retention and recruitment standpoint. Second, your thoughts about security, the perception of security on board our bus system. There, we have also made specific recommendations in our budget to enhance security from a bus standpoint. We have always had a security presence at our facilities, both the transit center and our rail stations. We're now have funded a roving bus security force. that will enhance security from a bus standpoint. And so all of those are being specifically targeted and addressed in our upcoming budget.
Thank you. And then finally, as far as the microtransit, I'm very, very happy to see some of the areas that were outlined, specifically the Northwest corridors, Freedom, Wilkinson, and West Boulevard, and also Still Creek. When it comes to microtransit, specifically in areas where there are a lot of employers, like down in Still Creek, have we had any discussions with private employers in terms of how to share those costs or what we can do from a TDM standpoint to get people to work?
So thank you. That's a great question, Councilmember Wallington. That is part of our next steps is talking to employers. We do, occasionally talk to some. We've talked to UPS out near the airport off I-85, and we continue to talk to employers around the university area, around the University Research Park. And so we're beginning those conversations right now, and we'll continue them as we develop that whole kind of operational rollout strategy for microtransit.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Watlington. I have a few things. I'll try to get through them quickly. First, I think this is our North Star. It's a great presentation. It's where we should be going and what we should be trying to achieve. So thank you for this work. Obviously, it is very robust. I too would like to know what the operating, overall for the whole plan, the operating and capital cost would be for this. And so that we can get an idea of what is in our budget this next year, because we all want to see a lot of these things happen pretty quickly, and we really don't have a feeling for what we could even implement with our existing budget. So I would like to see the overall cost, operating and capital. The second thing, thank you for microtransit as a solution. We've all been asking for this, and it's a great solution to try to adjust, to adapt to a very large system that it's hard to pivot on. So thank you for that. The enforcement, we're a city that doesn't like to enforce traffic rules. We've all been sort of hammering this point. So when you do talk about queue jumping and whatnot, we're going to have to work with CMPD or some other enforcement outfit, because I can just see it right now. The cars that fill in right behind that bus are in front of the bus. So we got to get serious. And I know that's not your job, but that's something we're going to have to talk about is enforcement. It's countercultural in Charlotte. And then the point about the riders, I have said this, it's an equity issue. We've all been focused, and I think we'd all agree. First and foremost, it should be about the people who have to ride the bus as a means of transportation. Owning a car in North Carolina is a luxury. It's on average $7,000 a year. It could be a lot cheaper for people to be able to ride public transportation if it wasn't efficient. But I also have noticed that just in looking around the country, the cities that have actually increased bus ridership since pre-pandemic have been cities that have been very serious about bus rapid transit. So not just queue jumping and things that are kind of incremental, but serious about bus rapid transit. Cities like Richmond, Virginia, they also focused on where the density is, where the ridership is, but where the density is. And so I think that all, for me, it speaks to not only the people that have to ride the bus. God love them for putting up with what they have to when you miss your bus and one's coming in 45 minutes and now you've missed, a good chunk of your workday. But I also want to know, why would people ride the bus when they can use their car? Since the pandemic, nationwide, cars on the roads have gone back to pre-pandemic levels. Public transportation ridership has not. So we still have to focus on what's going to get people out of their cars and on public transportation. Every system that seems to be increasing ridership speaks to the conditions in the bus. And with regards to my colleague's comment on safety, it's just like Uptown. If you've got more people there, it's going to feel safer and it's going to be safer. So more people riding the bus is going to feel safer for sure, and probably will be. But everything that goes along with the comfort of riding a bus, zipping by other cars that are stopped in traffic. And so we didn't really talk about bus rapid transit, but I would like to know what the plan is for a robust bus rapid transit program, regardless of the outcome of the last pilot program. That was unfortunate, but any city that's going to have a real bus system that works has got to include bus rapid transit. And so I wondered if you'd speak to that a little bit.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and great question. I think if I had to point to one single answer to this question, it's about time. Time is the scarcest resource we have and most preciously coveted. And so when we look at what drives our rail ridership, as I mentioned before, it's the reliability and speed of the ride. Even during COVID and as we are working through this pandemic, when you look at the large event ridership that we have, our rail ridership, our trains are packed, even in the midst of a pandemic. Why is that? Because people understand that the Blue Line, and now with the Gold Line with the extended offerings, that their time is going to be well considered in that. And so I think we have to try and find ways to bring that level of reliability and consistency to bus that rail has always enjoyed, and that rail has always been successful from drawing riders, even if they're not everyday riders. When you look at our large events, if there is an objective or destination in Uptown, whether a basketball, football, or soccer game, people utilize that service in large numbers. And so this study is about how do we bring that level of reliability. We talked about technology. We talked about some incremental improvements from a capital standpoint in queue jumpers. But the biggest change we can make is the decision that this city can make in terms of what is the priority, moving people or moving cars. And if it's moving people, then it allows us to have further discussions about how we move buses along the corridor and the need to look at bus-only lanes. You mentioned the pilot programs that we have implemented. It will be a big change from a cultural standpoint in terms of how we move throughout the city. But if we're going to meet the mode split goals that CDOT and ED have laid out, of 50-50 mode split between single occupant vehicles and other modes, then we've got to have a consideration of bus-only lanes. Because that is the only way we're going to meet the time expectations of the everyday rider.
And really move the needle.
And move that.
Get to
yes.
that 50-50. To that last point you brought up, I would like to know if you could speak to it. I've been to 2 recent concerts at B of A Stadium. You couldn't get near the light rail. You only have so many cars, right?
Right.
Can you work with those organizations, PNC? I mean, I don't even like going there for a concert up to the pavilion because of the traffic. Spectrum, B of A, to have extra buses for those concerts, because thousands of people, I've walked from the past two, 45 minutes before getting a ride just because you can't get out of that area.
Yeah.
Do you do that? Do you work with those for concerts? Now we're back to B of A where you've got 45,000 people leaving at the same time.
Right. So the challenge that we have, people love to use our service getting in because they trickle into events. Some
Right.
people may come in 3 or 4 hours ahead of time to tailgate and utilize, take advantage of entertainment options in Uptown. But the game ends and all 45,000 want to get home at the same time. And so we do put extra trains on the Blue Line and Gold Line to help accommodate that. But we have some structural challenges that we have. We did not anticipate that kind of need when we designed the Blue Line. And so we don't have the ability to send trains around trains. And we will try to address that as we continue to build out our system. In terms of other venues that are not along the Blue Line or Gold Line, we can add additional service to already standing routes, but we can't add what is called charter service. So I can't have an event-specific route that only operates during events because of FTA regulations on that. But we can supplement existing routes on that.
Okay, thank you. with that, I think we do need to move on. I think we did have some.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Okay.
can I ask one quick question? One quick question.
Make it quick, because we do have two other
Yeah, I
council
got
members
you,
who
I got you.
wanted to ask.
Has STS service been incorporated or considered at all in Envision My Ride? And if so, how?
So, Councilmember, that's not going to be a quick answer. Can I check in with you offline on that? We have incorporated STS into Envision My Ride, but because it is a total on-demand system, it's very hard to make capital improvements because the routes change every single day, if not multiple times a day. So in terms of frequency, reliability, and other things, there's some other solutions that we're looking into to try and spread out the demand on that.
I would love to connect offline. Thank you.
I'm going to just read two other quick comments from our colleagues who attended the meeting. Mr. Driggs would like to know how long this whole plan is going to take place to put in place. How long this will take, the realization of this utopia, is it, he puts it, which it is utopia, it'd be great. How long is it going to take to put this all in place? Can you answer that?
Well, I think it probably better, because that comes down to how you're funding the study and funding the recommendations coming out with existing resources. It'd be very incrementally over an extended period of time. New funding, you'd be able to do things much quicker. So I think if we can come back with a more informed response
And that
to
speaks to how much it costs, because I think that's what we have to wrap our heads
Yeah.
around. And then Mr. Phipps challenges all of us council members to take a bus to a committee or council meeting soon. Embrace the customer experience firsthand instead of sympathizing with those who must use the bus. He takes the 11U Hidden Valley bus or the 29. Good point, Mr. Phipps. Thank you. With that, I'm going to have to ask our planning director. We have a half hour left, and we've got about an hour of presentations left. Yeah, is the gold line something that is time sensitive right now, or if we, it is, okay. I would suggest, and I know nobody wants this, but we have to add another meeting for the update on the UDO, I really think. So let's do the gold line, hold off on the UDO unless there's anything right now that's time sensitive. Okay, otherwise, committee members, just stay tuned. We're gonna have to add another meeting. It's just critical that we get this information in. So with that, we'll go ahead and go with the gold line Phase 3 design contract presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And while David McDonald, who is the project manager, comes to the table, I just wanted to lay out very quickly. The Gold Line Phase 2 went into service in August of last year. We are about to begin design work for Gold Line Phase 3. We wanted to bring this to the committee to make sure to answer a couple of strategic questions. Number one, is this project still a priority for council and for the city? And two, if not, is it any portion or any changes to the study before we go out to update the 30% design? Remember that this project, Gold Line Phase 3, has done 30% design. Our intent is to update that current design for Phase 3, and any feedback or input from council members will be very helpful to us as we begin that work. So with that, I'll turn it over to David, who will run through the presentation.
All right, I'll try to go quickly. So go to the next slide. Just start off on a little bit of good note for the Gold Line Phase 2. We've nominated it for a NCDOT MOBI Awards. These are focused on multimodal type projects. We were nominated in two categories, one for large urban for areas over 100,000 in population, another for innovation for the vehicles, the hybrid technology. And we took first place in both of those and brought those trophies home. This is part of the team that was involved. Tons of people worked on it from all departments, and so something we're very proud of and wanted to share with you guys. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. So just to overview the presentation, we're going to just talk about the overall Gold Line and some of the history of the first two phases, talk about advancing Phase 3 and specifically the design services and scope of work, And right now, we're tentatively on the council agenda for May 31st to award that contract to continue design. So let's go on. So the 2030 corridor system plan, the streetcar was added back in 2002. The important thing with that is that it is an important link. If we can go to the next one. You know, why streetcar? Economic development is a key catalyst for economic development. It's been proven to, you know, work well in an intensely developed environment and provide that backbone. If we go to the next slide, to interconnect all of these kinds of activities. So you can see the number of small business employment destinations along the corridor, linking the educational, cultural, and sports venues in Uptown, connecting the historic West End and Elizabeth neighborhoods to Center City as well. So, just a reminder, Phase 1 was completed with the Urban Circulator Grant. We were able to do that as cheaply as we did because we reutilized existing Cameco replica vehicles, and we actually had a mile of track that was installed previously with the Elizabeth Avenue, the Elizabeth Streetcape project. And Phase 2, next slide, it was a 2.5 mile extension. Took us to 4 miles total length with 17 stops. All of our stops are now level boarding. We've upgraded to new hybrid technology vehicles, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a couple slides here, that allow us to operate the entire alignment. And most of that was to the west, but half a mile to the east as well. All right, next. One of the key things that, you know, I wanted to make sure we mention is that although the most visible part of streetcar is the streetcar running in the shelters when we're done, there's a significant amount of work that goes on underground. We replaced aging infrastructure, in some cases 50-plus years old, new stormwater, new water lines, conduit, public and private utilities, to the point that when we're done with this project, we now have a reliable infrastructure for our citizens for the next 50-plus years. And so a lot of times it looks like we're moving back and forth and not making a lot of progress, but each time it's one of these elements that's going into the ground. Okay? Another major piece was the replacement of the Hawthorne Lane Bridge. We certainly had some difficulties with this and challenges with our contractor. That being said, this is the most complicated bridge on the project. And we do have an infrastructure now that is, again, set for the next 50 to 100 years. All right? So talk a little bit about the technology piece, the off-wire operation. When we started the design of the project, it was a goal to be able to go through the square without being on wire, to be wireless. Our original design was just going to go from the transportation center at the arena up to Tryon Street. As we were gauging that technology during the design, we were determined we could extend that. And so we took it all the way to the federal courthouse at Mint Street. When we opened, we actually opened with a workaround. We've been operating since opening from the arena, the transit center at the arena, all the way to the Johnson and Wells stop, so nearly a mile off wire. The significance of this is that it gives us opportunity to look at this technology in future phases to reduce the amount of overhead catenary we have to install, reduce the amount of conflicts, and reduce the amount of expense as well as impact during construction. All right. As with all of our projects, CATS incorporates art through our Art in Transit program. Within the Gold Line, these are predominantly within the shelters, but also in the vehicles. This is an example, and we continue to do that. This is a very desirable program and engages the public in the art, and it's something that's been very successful. Okay? So looking toward Phase 3, so we built 4 miles of an ultimate 10-mile alignment. We still have 2 miles left to the west and 6 miles to the east in order to achieve the original vision for streetcar. Next slide. So some of the key elements of Phase 3, we have some new bridge crossings. We have 3, 2 to the west and 1 to the east. We'll need to look at acquiring an additional 16 to 20 vehicles to be able to operate the extension. adding additional 18 stops, 15 to 20 miles of track, and incorporating all of that within our existing system-wide maintenance and operations program. And of course, looking at the traction power and overhead systems that we do have to install and taking advantage of the hybrid vehicles where we can to minimize those. All right? So the goals for the initial portion of the Phase 3 study, main thing is updating the environmental document, but to look at updating the design based on what's happened in the years since it was originally done back in 2010. Applying the lessons learned from the previous work, including making some recommendations for travel time and reliability improvements. It's a theme you're going to hear me say more than once. Evaluating the expansion of those off-wire operations, and continuing to look at ways to reduce construction impacts and improve project delivery. Key thing is to start looking at getting away from straight up design, bid, build, and start looking at other project delivery methods. And making sure that the project is ready for future federal funds. All right. Just some of the key elements that make up improved travel time and operational reliability, whether that be exclusive or semi-exclusive guideway, signal priority and queue jumpers that were mentioned before, other operational improvements that we can do to improve our travel time, and engaging the public more on regular educational efforts and accompanying that with enforcement as well. All right. So our key outcomes, we want to have an approved environmental document that puts us in a position to be able to seek federal funds and be able to advance the project. We want to make sure that we're finalizing the east and west alignments and the stop locations, updating that 30% design to bring it back up to current standards, getting a new cost estimate, and all of this will be accomplished while we're engaging the public and including their input, and gaining a prioritized list of travel time and reliability improvements. All right. So looking at each side of the corridor, you're going to hear some repeats, but you know, on the west side, we need to confirm and adjust 5 stop locations to the west. We have to evaluate 2 bridge crossings, the NC-16 bridge or Brookshire Boulevard, and I-85 bridge that we for Beatty's Ford going over I-85. And again, continuing to explore those travel time improvements along that corridor. But those are 2 key elements there. All right. On the east side, we have 13 stop locations to the east that need to be confirmed or adjusted based on changes in needs and development. We'll evaluate the CSX crossing. At this location, we go under CSX, and so the opportunity to go wireless in this area is important. And then evaluating the alignment and stops through Plaza Midwood to address potential construction impacts and try to minimize those. And then again, travel time and reliability is a key element as well. So those are the key elements for Phase 3. We have selected a consultant to do the design work to be able to move forward, or recommended one, AECOM. It's currently on City Council agenda for $4.3 million on May 31st. And you have to answer any questions. Go to the next slide.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give Mr. Eggleston the first question.
Thank you. Is Guideway synonymous with what I've been referring to as dedicated right-of-way?
It is.
Thank you. I'll certainly support $4.3 million to keep us moving forward with this plan on the 31st, but I've said before, and I'll be even more clear now, I won't vote for Phase 3 of the Gold Line streetcar if it does not have dedicated right-of-way. Having Phase 3 of the streetcar down Central Avenue, subject to the same traffic as all the cars, will do nothing to provide someone a better option to commute. I am intimately familiar with this project and am in line in front of or behind these cars a lot, just in my day-to-day travels. We still don't have good ridership. This should not be a priority, and I'm not saying that it is, but I'm reiterating that it shouldn't be a priority over improving our bus system moving forward on the Silver Line and other things that we're working on. And this, directly, if and when we had a magic wand and we could have phase 3 completed and operational, would be a great benefit to my district. And I actually live right near one of these stops, so I would love to see it myself. But the two things, and I'm glad that you called them both out proactively, but that exclusive or semi-exclusive right-of-way, or as you called it, guideway, I think is critical to making this something anyone actually uses. And the other thing that, again, I appreciate you calling out is, I don't know where it went now, but you said somewhere about making sure the impacts to businesses, because Central Avenue is, particularly these sections of it where these additional 13 stops would go, is a huge corridor for small local businesses, many of which are immigrant-owned, many of which are owned by people of color, the type of businesses that if they close for any reason, but if they close due to a project like this that we've made a decision to move forward on, they will never come back. I had friends lose businesses during the construction of phase 1 on Elizabeth Avenue, and those businesses never came back. So that's not a trade I'm willing to make, and I think, I don't know what the solution is there in terms of, can we even include funding for helping some of these businesses survive whatever period of time we anticipate, or can we compartmentalize the construction more? We certainly had businesses suffer during phase 2 and with the Hawthorne Bridge, and we had lots of residents whose quality of life suffered significantly during that construction period. And I don't anticipate having another Hawthorne Bridge type issue, but I think on a project this big and a project that involves crossing railroad lines, highways, interstates, there will be challenges that we can't possibly foresee, but we've got to have a strategy to make sure that we're minimizing those negative impacts to citizens and businesses. And we've got to end up with a product that gives people a better travel time than a car, and right now the streetcar does not. The frequencies frankly don't work. I've tried to use it a couple of times for different things and ended up just walking, because you stand there for a period of time, or some idiots parked their car in a way that blocks the track, and then the train stopped for 20 minutes, and no way to get around it. So back to an enforcement piece that the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned earlier. You block a rail track, will just impound your car. I mean, we got to have something that makes people realize that they're not just going to you get a slap on the wrist for stuff like this, because they're impacting people being able to get to work, being able to get to the doctor, whatever. But we also built a system that allowed for one idiot who can't park a car to hold up a whole system. And I just don't think that's viable on how long do we say, 14 mile?
10 miles.
10 total, it'd be 10 total. A 10 total mile system. So supportive of continuing to move the study forward, or design forward, but that design, it's got to be for dedicated right away, and it's got to account for the challenges we have faced with the first 2 phases.
Councilman Hall, great questions and great issues you've raised. This streetcar was designed, and typically when you look at streetcar systems across the nation, they're in that 2 to 4 mile range because they're in highly dense, very busy business districts of the urban core. In essence, streetcars have been operated to compete with the pedestrian, trips that you would normally walk to. When you move beyond 4 miles to a 10 mile, then you need to compete with the car. And you're exactly on point that the only way to do that is to find dedicated is the best option for us. But certainly during this design phase, we will be looking for solutions for that. We cannot operate a 10-mile streetcar like we operate phase 1 or 2. Just won't work. Your suggestions or your thoughts about enforcement are 100%. That is a single point of failure in our system. People who either can't park for one reason or choose deliberately to block the right-of-way is a significant challenge for us and continues to be, and we've got to find ways around that. Thirdly, about the impact of business, I think in the past, that has been a significant challenge for federally funded projects. Funds have been specifically dedicated for constructing projects and within the right-of-way. But I think now with the realization of the impact that the pandemic has had on businesses and the communities, other programs and other models of assistance have come up that I think bears an opportunity for us to have different conversations with the feds about what their funding can and cannot be used for. And of course, the city can help us in that regard with programs that are generated by the city in that regard. And so a lot of work still needs to be done on that, but your points are exactly on track.
Thank you. District Rep on the other side of the track, literally, Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. And since Larkin got all A's for the questions he asked, I'm just going to say ditto to everything that he said. One, I can't believe that we're still at it, right? I was at the very first streetcar meeting on the campus of Johnson C. Smith when it was a theory. And now we're talking about building a phase 3. I think Larkin asked all the appropriate questions. Obviously, there's some lessons learned from the first time around. As it relates to the leeway to go forward, I think we should. I think we got to do so with caution. Obviously, the numbers aren't where we want them to be, and I think that has a lot to do with the pandemic, when it opened, how it opened. But as we look 30, 40 years down the road, and that's why I think we're building this thing for, not for our usage, but for mobility 10, 20, 15 years from now, it may be in the best interest of the community to take yet another step forward. I am concerned, just like Larkin. I mean, I love, and Larkin probably doesn't know this, but I'm in his district all the time. I'm always at Veterans Park. I'm always at Common Market. I'm telling you all my spots now, right? And so I love Central Avenue, and what makes it so unique is the businesses, right? And so how we proceed, and obviously there'll be some impact on the west side relating to businesses, not nearly as much on Larkin's side of the street. And I think that's something that we really, really got to pay close attention to, because notwithstanding the bridge fiasco, if those businesses were to be closed that long, they certainly wouldn't come back for sure. So I just second everything that the representative from District 1 indicated.
Thank you. Mr. Winston?
I have similar concerns, of course, but I think this is going to be one of the rare times where you're going to see me say, we need to move fast and swift and enforce things. These are solutions that shouldn't have to wait until this phase 3 study. We need to have a solution to enforce those single points of failure by bad parking right now. I think we should move forward on this. I do believe, like as Mr. Eggleston and Mr. Graham said, dedicated right-of-ways, again, especially in our urban core right now, but especially as we think of phase 3. I think one of the ways that Mr. Lewis talked about it just now is we have to take competition away from pedestrians and transit riders for the vehicle on these corridors. If you walk between LaSalle Street and the west terminus of the Gold Line on Beatties Ford Road, it is not a pedestrian-friendly bit of road. You're right up on the road. There's very little room for error, and those vehicles move fast, even though you pass a very popular and populated school on the way. So we need, that's something that, I think is different than just Katz's study. And I think we need to figure out how to move forward, move collaboratively across departments with this And again, thinking about even on the eastern terminus, I think we would want to make the investments that are being made at Eastland most accessible and most valuable. But again, you look at that stretch of Central Avenue from the eastern terminus to Eastway, let's just say, yeah, there are a significant amount of businesses, but it is not pedestrian centric. So we hear folks that are talking, we're considering things like social districts and along the future phase 3 of the Gold Line, but we're talking about that outside of making Central Avenue pedestrian centric. So how are we going to get pedestrians and transit riders who are drinking and walking around out of competition with vehicles? So I think when you overlay all of those things, if we layer those things and think about those all at the same time, then you will have a solution that equates to reducing that competition with vehicles along the existing and future Gold Line routes. And that's the way we need to go to make most of the investments that we have already made and should make in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Watlington.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I do believe that my hand is probably left up from last time. I asked all the questions that I had pertaining to transit.
Thank you. And I'll just add to what my colleagues have said. I think it, even though it's just 4.3 million, before we vote on that, I would like to see the issue addressed as to what remedies would be taken to not have the same sort of disruptions that we had last time with regards to closed businesses, that sort of thing. What are the ideas that would help mitigate that? And secondly, I would like to hear more about the problems that exist right now with delays and that sort of thing before I vote in May for the 4.3 million. It's not a lot of money, but I just think we need to take care of, and I apologize, we've got a lot of disruption going on in the background behind us outside. I just would like to hear more about how we're going to address the disruptions that are existing right now that prevent or stop people from wanting to use the Gold Line before I vote at least to support the 4.3 million. And last question for you, is the app, where are we right now with all three, the Gold Line, bus service, and light rail, with real-time information on the app?
Sure. So our real-time app for bus has been in operation since last fall. We hope to have the rail portion up. We're actually in beta testing now on a handful of rail cars. So both the Blue Line and Gold Line, we hope to have that real time, which I think will be very helpful from a live, particularly on the Gold Line, will happen by early this summer.
So that, because I was looking at it as we were talking about, because there was a time when the light rail wasn't on here at all, and now it appears to be, but none of that is real time, or part of it is?
The light rail has not been on the app ever. It's only been bus. We are testing now app. What you will see on the app right now is the scheduled time for Blue Line and Gold Line, but it is not real time.
Oh,
so when we open up real time, you will actually be able to see where the vehicles are on the alignment, just like you can bus.
Okay. So real time for rail is coming.
Yes.
In the summer. Real time for bus
Has been in operation
is in
for months.
place.
Yeah.
Okay, because I just noticed if you plan from point A to point B, it gives you, you're going to have to take a couple different forms of transportation, bus to the light rail, whatever, but it's not clear that one is real time, one's not real time.
So in planning, it's different planning. It will plan your trip based on the real time for bus, but scheduled time for light rail, where this next scheduled trip. But when you utilize the real time app, it's really about planning when you leave for your trip. And so it would be, what is the, my bus is coming to the stop at Fourth and McDowell. When is that vehicle coming? You can open the app and see where the vehicle is and when it will come to that app. In terms of your overall trip that you may plan, I need to get from here to the airport. That's based on a number of factors, both real-time and scheduled.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, it might be helpful to put on the app, just so people are aware, this is real time, this is scheduled. Because if you've got a coordinated trip like that, that's integrating more than one, I don't know. Anyway, I just think it's a little confusing, but, okay. With that, we are gonna go ahead and Allison, we can try to set something up for the UDO review? Okay. Great, thank you, everybody, for your presentations. I really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody who participated today. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
One second. Thank you.
Kind of drive the lane. That's what Dallas did. The other piece would be